Hi, welcome to my channel. Welcome back if you've watched my videos before. Today I'm going to be doing a May TBR. I apologize. I planned to do a book review of a classic and have that up by last weekend. I actually have like 3 interviews. I feel like those kind of have to take priority right now. So I'm hoping that I can have a book review up either the end of next week or the following week after. I promise it'll be worth the wait. I think it's going to be a review of Anna Karenina, which I read back in January and just like have so many thoughts and opinions about. So I really apologize for the delay. Also, just a brief announcement. I've actually created a separate channel for my video essays. I know some people are just here for the books, and that's totally fair. I understand. So this channel is now just going to be book content. So book reviews, TBRs, and wrap-ups, which I will get to. And so I'm going to have a separate channel which is going to have all of the video essays, which really are going to be based on a lot of the books that I'm reading. And then I will have a third channel which is going to be my vlog channel where I upload the vlog content. So I have links to those channels in the description box. Really appreciate the support if people are interested in that content. Also, I know I have been very bad with doing monthly wrap-ups. I did one in December and have not done one since. I think what I'm gonna do right now is do like a Q1 wrap-up where I talk about some of my favorite and least favorite books for January to March, and have that out first. And then I think I will slowly but surely go back and do wrap-ups for January, February, March, and then obviously April. So let me know in the comments if people are okay with that, or if there's another sort of method that you'd prefer. I just felt like that's the best way to sort of talk about a few of the books that I've read so far that I would really recommend or that I really would not recommend, and then I can go back and actually do proper wrap-ups for each of the months. The main reason I haven't done them is there's been at least like one book each month that I haven't quite figured out my thoughts on. So for example, in January I read a ton of books and I read Animal Farm and I really liked it, but just like didn't know how to talk about it in a wrap-up. Like there's so much history and context that you really need to have in order to understand that book really well. I just haven't really had the time to go into the background and really feel like I can describe it sufficiently. And a similar note, in February, I finally finished the Nicomachean Ethics, which is amazing. That is, I think, the first book I gave 5 stars this year. But I'm like, how can I do it justice and talk about the Nicomachean Ethics in like 5 minutes? Like I can. And so I was just so overwhelmed at having to condense my thoughts into a video that I just never did it. Also in January I read The Myth of Sisyphus and I'm just like, how do I talk about how much I hate this book? So anyway, I'm now starting to like feel a little bit less overwhelmed about those tasks. So I hope I can get a January one up sometime in May, which is like so late. I really apologize, but I think I'm gonna do that and just like talk about my favorite and least favorite books and then go back and do monthly wrap-ups. So that's sort of some like housekeeping background stuff. So I think I have like 6 books on this list. Okay, so only 1 fiction book this month. I'm really in a nonfiction mood and I'm gonna just stick with it. I'm not even gonna force myself to read fiction if I don't want to. The 1 fiction book I do plan to read this month is East of Eden by John Steinbeck. So I don't know a ton about this book. So it seems to be sort of like this family saga about this family that lives in California. And from my understanding, it's very much based on sort of like some stories within the Bible. So the idea of like Adam and Eve, the fall from the Garden of Eden, and then also the story of like their 2 sons who were Cain and Abel. And I always found it really interesting. I grew up going to church and I never really understood that story. I was like, why did he hate his brother so much? Like, why did he kill him? So anyway, it seems like this novel by Steinbeck is based around all of that. So I'm really interested to see what Steinbeck does with this story. So now onto nonfiction. The first book I want to read is The Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir. This is like a classic feminist text. It was written a while ago, but I've always wanted to read it. I understand she had this long-term open relationship with Sartre, who is one of the major existential philosophers. From what I understand, their relationship was like somewhat problematic. It seems like Simone de Beauvoir was kind of grooming women for Sartre, but in her own right, she was very successful and was very pivotal when it comes to feminism and the feminist movement. It is a 39-hour audiobook though, so I am a little bit intimidated, but fingers crossed I can actually get through the whole thing. I would say ever since December really, I've been trying to pick one book about Israel-Palestine in order to learn more. I just finished the 100 Years War on Palestine, which I thought was good, but was definitely not for beginners. It was just like encyclopedic information, like so densely filled with information. Really been looking for something that is a good book for beginners because I have a lot of people in my life who've been wanting to learn more and just don't really know where to start. So I'm going to try The Shortest History of Israel and Palestine, which is written by Michael Scott-Baumann. The audiobook is almost always available at my library, so I really want to give this a read and see if it is a good book for beginners. I don't know. I have listened to one Vox podcast, which I will include in the description box, which I would really recommend if someone wants an understanding of what's going on. What I liked about this is they talked about sort of the history in a brief level, but then also talked about what actually can be done to stop the bombing of Palestine by Israel. But a lot of what the speaker in the podcast was saying is that Americans need to put pressure on their government in order to have Biden stop supporting Israel and Netanyahu. And I think things like that are part of the reason why these protests in America at all of these universities are so powerful, because this is a sort of movement that Americans need to have in order to get their government to really feel like they have no choice but to stop supporting Israel. I don't know about anyone else, but I have been following the protests that are happening at universities. I've been glued to my phone watching it, and just want to say to the students, you guys are inspirational. Anyway, before I go on a rant about Palestine, just wanted to say to the students, you're amazing, you're inspirational, keep doing what you're doing. This is another honorable mention because I don't know if I'm going to be able to finish it in May, but I did want to talk about it because I found it yesterday and it seems so interesting. So this is also about Israel and Palestine, but this is looking at it from an international law perspective. And this is called Justice for Some by Noura, Erakat. From my understanding, the author is looking at the international law decisions that have been made about the state of Israel and about Palestine and the Palestinians' rights. And when I was in law school, I took a course on international law, which I found absolutely fascinating. It actually focused a lot on the International Court of Justice. So I'm just curious to see what this book is about. I'm putting it on my TBR because I don't know if I'm going to be able to finish it, but I might end up just like digging in and out of a few chapters. The next book I want to talk about is Highway of Tears, and that is by Jessica McDiarmid. I actually might end up finishing this at the end of April, but I just wanted to include this. I have been sort of working through this book since the beginning of the year, but now I finally want to dig into it because I'm really interested in exploring the discrimination towards Indigenous and Black people in Canada. I live in Canada, and in Canada we have a really big issue of Indigenous women and girls who go missing and end up murdered or are never found. And this is particularly an issue along Highway 16, which has been nicknamed the Highway of Tears. And this is a highway in British Columbia. So I have listened to the first few chapters of this already, and it seems like each chapter covers a different girl or woman who has gone missing. And it's just so heartbreaking and such a very difficult read because, at least in the chapters I've read so far, no one takes it seriously. The mothers call the police, no one looks for these women, and it's a really big problem that we have in Canada that I feel like is not really taken seriously at all. This is an area that I feel quite uneducated about, and I've really felt the need to learn more about Indigenous Canadians and their issues, and so I plan to give this a read either, like I said, the end of April or in May. Another book I plan to read is this book right here, and it's From Black Lives Matter to Black Liberation by Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor. I just started it last week, which is where these little annotations have come from. From what I've seen so far, she's been talking about Barack Obama as a president and how for a lot of Black Americans, it was seen as a beacon of hope that Obama was elected, but he just did so little for the Black community. I don't know a lot about it. I've only listened to like 20 or 30 minutes so far, but I've really been wanting to give this book a read. A few months ago, I made a list of recommendations of nonfiction books for Black History Month, and I want to have a little bit more of an updated list because a lot of those books I'd read many years ago. So far I've been really enjoying this, and yeah, I'm really interested to see what else she says. From what I remember, the author is a professor at Princeton. at least when this book was written. So the last nonfiction book I want to talk about is Be a Revolution, and this is by Ijeoma Oluo. I have read one of her books previously, So You Want to Talk About Race, and it seems to be a book, I would say, for beginners that is talking all about how to be involved in actually making a change. And that's actually something that I've really been wanting to learn more about. You see the protests, you sign the petitions, but how do you actually get involved in making these changes in a long-term way? And this book does seem to deal with it. Some of the movements that she talks about in this book include the disability movement, racism, labor movement, the environmental movement. So in the introduction, she talks about the fact that a lot of people within the disability movement have chosen to refer to themselves as disabled rather than a person who has a disability. And when I heard that, it reminded me of the review I had done on Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. And I remember when I was doing that review, I referred to one of the main characters as someone who has a disability. And I remember when I was saying that, I wasn't sure if that was the appropriate way to refer to this character. And now I can see it might have been better to refer to them as disabled. So I apologize for that if that was offensive. I think all of this is always about learning, but then also apologizing when you have made a mistake or mislabeled somebody or referred to somebody in an incorrect way. So I'm interested to give this a read. I think this is probably going to be one of the first books that I read in May, because I feel like with everything going on with the protests happening at these universities, like it really does feel like there's a change happening in society. It doesn't help that Biden has banned TikTok in America. People are feeling like their politicians are not listening to them and really wanting to take a stand. And I mean, it's not like Canada is much better. Right now we have Trudeau, but there's going to be an election soon, and the leader of the Conservatives very much resembles a sort of Trump, Boris Johnson type person, and typically after the Liberals have been in power, usually goes to Conservatives, so that could be the next leader of Canada. So it's just like, how do you, as an individual who feels like a very small piece of the country's population, actually feel like you can go about making a change and informing people? Because I think a lot of people my age, I find, are just not interested or engaged in politics and don't really feel like they can make a change. So I'm really interested to give that book a read and hopefully work on feeling more empowered within my society. So I know people gave me recommendations about King Leopold's Ghost as a book to read about the Congo, and I put that as a request from my local library. I just haven't been able to get a copy of the audiobook yet, but I'm now looking for a recommendation for a book about a revolutionary. So I kind of had thought maybe I wanted to do Che Guevara or Fidel Castro. I'm looking for a revolutionary, ideally someone who is like Marxist or socialist and has a book that is not really an autobiography, more talks about the movement and how one can make a change. Like, for example, I've read State and Revolution by Lenin, which I think is really, really great. I almost feel like I just like want that, but written by somebody else. And someone who's maybe a little bit more modern day, like in the Cuban Revolution. I also have been wanting to read works by Thomas Sankara. It doesn't seem like my library has any of his books. But yeah, I'm looking for someone who's like a little bit more of a more present or modern day revolutionary like that, who has a little bit of a treatise on like revolution and their ideas on like how you can go about having a revolution. I know there also is Revolutionary Suicide by Huey Newton, which I read a while ago. Just feel like the first half of that was a bit more autobiographical in nature than what I'm looking for. Like, I really want something that's like very little autobiography, more just about movement and change. So if anyone has any recommendations, would love to hear from you, but also no pressure. I'm sure I can find something myself if I actually just spend a solid few hours looking. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much for all of the love and support, and I will see you in the next one.